sharing? Perfect.
Yes,
okay.
yes.
Great. Okay. All right. Well, welcome here, folks. I just want to start off by welcoming you all. This webinar series is co-hosted with my from MCC, Abuse Response and Prevention, together with Salvation Army. So we have Hennis from the Hennis, I forget your title. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. I'm the program manager for the Choose to Change program, where we work with men that have been arrested and have been abusive to their partners. So this topic today fits very well for us.
Yes. And then also we have Zita Somokoko with Breaking the Silence on Domestic Violence. I don't know if I haven't seen her pop up yet, but she's also part of the our group that has brought these webinars to you today. So I don't know, Zita, if you are there, you can quickly maybe unmute and just say hello.
Okay, I don't see her yet.
Yeah, all good. So I would like to start off this time by just doing a treaty land acknowledgement. And I just invite you all really to maybe to pause and come into this moment. And I know doing a treaty land acknowledgement is has becoming more of a regular practice. And I really see it as a time to center myself and really take stock and attune to what my hopes are for our country and for our peoples. And so I don't take this practice lightly. And I invite us all to, stop and pause and let this be a moment too, where we can say a blessing or a prayer. So to start, we would like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Treaty 1 territory. So for myself and those from Manitoba, and that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. And if you're joining us from a different location, then we also acknowledge the treaty of that respective area and the traditional territory. And my hope and prayer is that we may all walk on this land in a relation with one another in a way that fosters justice and equity and healing and community. So thank you all for showing up today. I'm so excited to have Magi Cooper with us. She is part of the MCC community out in BC and has done a lot of collaboration with them. And so it's really great that we had the opportunity to, share Magi with a wider audience and from folks in Manitoba today. And I realized too, there's folks from other provinces as well, but I think the majority of folks here are probably from Manitoba. So it's so good to be able to, have Magi with us today. And I would like to just start by introducing her so you know a little bit about her. And then I'll turn it over to her. And just so you folks know, you can we are recording this. So please, we ask that you put your questions in the chat rather than unmute and talk, because then your face will show up in the recording. So the way we have it set up now is that the recording will only show who's speaking. So if you unmute yourself and talk, then your face will show up, and just for privacy, we want only the speaker's face. So just please put your questions in the chat and we'll be monitoring those. So you don't need to worry about that, Magi. All right, so I will just introduce Magi to you all now. So Magi Cooper has been a dedicated advocate for domestic peace for over 30 years. Her journey began working with children who had witnessed abuse. As important as that work is, it became apparent to her that the intergenerational cycle of intimate partner violence cannot be stopped until men are offered the support, education, and opportunity to take personal responsibility for their choices, become accountable, and end their abusive behavior. Since that time, Magi has co-facilitated respectful relationship programs for men incarcerated for spousal assault and relationship violence program for the Ministry of Public Safety and Solicitor General Corrections Branch. She and her husband, Bob Morrissey, have co-facilitated 4 consecutive 20-week Beyond Blame programs for men who are voluntarily seeking help to end their abusive behavior. In 2018, Magi was the primary creative writer of Respectful Futures, a 6-module resource currently being used in schools and in the community. And that resource is something we will highlight next week when we send out a follow-up email with resources. And Respectful Futures is a fantastic resource for anyone here working with young people. And not just young people, adults as well. Over the years, she has worked with countless men as they struggle with the values, beliefs, and behaviors that have allowed them to misuse their power in their intimate relationships. Maggie is a certified Hakomi therapist and trainer and a right use of power facilitator and trainer. She also sits on the MCC and Abuse Advisory Committee. It is her passionate commitment to continue working with men, women, and children to promote peace and safety for all family members. And Maggie lives in Nanaimo, BC, the traditional and unceded territory of the Coast Salish people, the traditional territory of the Nanaimo First Nation. Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, I will turn it over to you now.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jamie. And welcome to everybody. I'm just delighted to be here and to be, sharing and creating conversation about this. To me, it's kind of the gospel of reconciliation as we seek to reconcile all kinds of relationships and many relationships. I thank you, Jamie, for the land acknowledgement. I think it is important, and that's part of reconciling a relationship fraught with violence, just fraught with violence. And for me, because I grew up with a father who behaved violently. It's not the total sum of who he was. So I wouldn't say, I'm not going to label him as a violent man, but I will say that he was a man who used violence to discipline. He used violence to resolve conflict. He used violence to maintain his power and privilege in the household. So as that, for me to be doing this work with men right now feels, for me, it's a personal gospel of reconciliation. So here's something that I've learned, and there's many things that I haven't learned. I am of a generation, not that I want to put everybody in my category, but I did not grow up with technology. So not this kind of technology. My technology was a typewriter and a radio. But so you'll bear with me as we work through this. But I am very clear that I am not a lecturer. So that's not how I want to use the next 2 hours. I'd really like it to be interactive. If you have questions or comments, please use the chat box. And although there's particular things that I'd like to address, I'm also interested in questions that you have. And in my workshops, there's often a time for Q&A. I prefer talking about Q and R. I might not have an answer, but I'll probably have a response. So with that in mind.
Maggie, I'm just going to interrupt you for a second. I just want you to know that the webinar will be finished at, our time 1:30. So we have an hour and 15 minutes.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
I just want you to know what your time.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'll just make one little correction on that. Thank you for the introduction, Jamie. But I think you said that Bob and I did 4 consecutive 20-week programs. We actually did 40. So we have, quite a long history, and the Beyond Blame program was for voluntary clients. So having worked with, honestly, countless men over the years, I found that, there's some really important things that these men have in common. I'm going to try screen sharing for a moment. Anybody who feels in the mood to say a little prayer, now would be a good time.
You got this, Maggie.
I've got this, thank you. I know the screen that I want to, okay. Okay. See what happens. Okay. Share computers. I deeply apologize. Okay. Back to meeting. Well, I might have to send these to you, Jamie.
No,
And
it's
I probably can't. Pardon?
Yeah, we can see them, Maggie. So if you just go to
what
the
can you
top
see?
bar, I see model for a healthy relationship.
Okay.
I plus we.
Okay. All right.
If you want, you can just click play from current slide on the top bar there.
Well, I want to be able to
move between them.
Yeah. Okay. So I hope that this is.
I'll make one more suggestion, Maggie. I think they'll show up a little bit bigger. If you go to the bottom right corner where you see a plus minus sign. Yeah, your cursor is almost there.
Oh, okay.
46%. Keep moving to the right.
Right. My other right?
No, the other way. Yeah, keep going, keep going, keep going.
Oh, keep going.
No. Yeah, keep going. No, I want you to click on that little plus sign.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much.
You think you'll get bigger then? There we go. Perfect. Then we can read that.
Okay.
Wonderful.
All right. So that's not actually where I want to be right now. But I'll tell you here, let's, so one of the things that I've learned is that the majority of men, we start out with this model that says a healthy relationship is one individual plus another individual plus the relationship. We used to use I plus I equals we, but you know what? That's not effective, because then it becomes the whole goal is we. But we do not cease being individuals when we get into relationship. So to make space, and I think very often there's a trap that we believe that a healthy relationship is only we. It's us. It's you and I against the world, or you and I with the world. And that's just not, that's a gateway, actually, in fact, to power and privilege. If the total sum of the relationship is us, then, I'm invested, or what happens for men often is they get invested in what they believe is their right to be the primary decision maker, or and I think of say a fellow comes home from work, and let me put a little disclaimer in here too. This is not about all women in relationships where power is used to resolve conflict. There are also women who use power to resolve conflict. The majority of perpetrators of intimate partner violence, the majority of the perpetrators are men. And there are female perpetrators as well. So just to be clear about that, and I'm going to use the language that refers to men as misusing their power, and women as the primary recipient of that. So the primary person who is likely to be harmed. So just that's a disclaimer around language. So in this model for a healthy relationship, you know, first of all, in working with men, that's all by itself very opening, very, new information. Let me go with that. And what we want to say is that these two individuals, when getting into relationship, they are deciding to share their resources. And by their resources, I don't just mean their stuff, but the resources that they bring to the relationship are emotional, physical, mental, and spiritual. This is what we're asking you to bring to the table, both parties, and recognizing that in an intimate relationship, this is what is required. So the next thing that I would do is write I plus we, and then I make a circle around that. And I talk to the men about what do you believe are the ingredients to a healthy relationship? And, you know, quite often there's a little head scratching and going on. And then somebody will say, trust. So trust goes on the circle. And then I just open it up and it's the men who come up with all the ingredients. And if somebody, so trust, honesty, kindness, faithfulness. So we go around and the men come up with rather extraordinary friendship, compassion, forgiveness. And these are the men coming up with these ingredients. So to be able to say to them afterwards, okay, you came up with this brilliant list, and this is magnificent. And I will tell you, whether I'm working with therapists who are learning how to work with men who misuse their power, and I have them do this exercise first, or the men themselves, the list is indistinguishable. So one of the things that we want to do in working with men that I think is fundamental is I tell them my job is to help you manifest this, because these are your ideas and they're not just ideas, but you wouldn't have mentioned them if they weren't also your values. So you value these things in relationship. So when we talk about, you know, we don't have to power over men. It's dangerous to power over them. I don't mean that physically, but it will not repair harm. It creates more harm. If I sit down with a book and say, you know, this is what you need to learn in the next so many weeks or whatever, they are going to disidentify with anything that I have to say. When we start in this way, it is their group. These are your ideas. So it makes it very safe for them to identify with the changes that they want to make. Does that make sense? Yep. Thoughts or comments about that? Hearing none. I want to talk a little bit about one of the things that really keeps people stuck. And I'm talking about both the partners in the relationship, but also caregivers and pastors and some therapists and parents, is that we are stuck on myths about relationship. and the myths of relationship get in the way of addressing the issues. So take a deep breath, and I'm imagining you're looking at this screen. And here are some of the things that we, where we get trapped. If you really love me, you'd know what I'm thinking, or you know what I'm feeling, or you know what I need. And I am 4 square against assuming that my partner knows what I'm thinking, what I need, what I want, what I'm capable of in this moment. So there's a myth right there. A great relationship is easy all the time. That just plain isn't true. But that gets in the way, because sometimes, people come in and the serial relationships is everything in the attraction part of the relationship. It is easy. And it's like, oh my gosh, I love pizza and you love pizza. Ooh, this is easy. I like that song. You like that song. This is easy. So there's an infatuation where relationship can be easy, but it is absolutely not going to be easy all the time. 100%. With respect to the Old Testament, in relationship, the two shall become one. I think that that's a euphemism for you guys can go have sex now, and not so much that 2 people become one person. If my partner's, if my back is itchy, scratching my partner's back is not going to solve my itch. We are not one. We are 2 individuals who are made a conscious choice that we want to be in relationship. That's the we. That's the relationship, which is a separate entity from the 2 individuals. Okay, take a breath. You're my better half. Or equally mythological, you're my better half, or I'm your better half. Go back to the model. I'm not half of anything. I do not cease to be an individual because I'm in relationship. So Bob, bless his heart, is not my better half, nor am I his, or was I his. So your relationship is your happiness. No, sometimes the relationship brings you happiness or brings you joy, but my joy belongs to me. My happiness belongs to me. It's generated from me. It's my response to this particular circumstance or situation. So I kind of dwell on this a little bit. Jealousy is a sign of love. That's just plain nonsense. And in a great relationship, you do everything together. Because, and again, we'll go back to that circle of ingredients, because they will name time together as an important ingredient. They will also name time apart as an important ingredient. And I totally support that. We cannot do everything together, or one person is betraying themselves. There are fun and wonderful things that we can do together. That's incredibly important. But the idea that your partner must do everything with you leads to distress. It's just not true. So for ourselves, for either either partner in the relationship, and for anybody who's trying to come alongside, just take a moment and see if you've used this language. Take a breath. Have you used this language? Have you held these things to be true? Did you hold them to be true at some point in time, and now you recognize that actually, in fact, it's not? Sometimes we carelessly use the language of, so how's your better half? And even though in a way it's unintentional, in another way, it perpetuates the myth that your partner is your better half. Does that make sense? Okay. So being familiar with the myths and how the myths keep both the partners and people coming alongside, keeps them stuck, keeps us all stuck. In a relationship, and at this point, I'd go back to the circle, which, Jamie, I'll send that to you as a slide. I don't have it up right now, but to go back to their ideas about, for example, in a great relationship, you do everything together. To go back to the model that they created, the time that they said, time together and time apart are both important ingredients. So again, I think it is so important to appeal to what the men already know and the values and what they're looking for. I use the language often when in the work that I've done, whether it's incarcerated population or voluntary population. By far, the vast majority of men want to be in a relationship in a good way. They want to score a goal for team relationship. They just don't have a clue where the goalposts are. So this is part of the work that we're doing, is pulling them back to that which they value and taking a look at what gets in the way. So there's lots of things that get in the way. One of the things is just not knowing how to do it. They don't know how to do it because they probably did not grow up in a household where a healthy relationship was modeled. They likely grew up in a household where conflict was resolved by violence. They would like to, because I think it's hardwired in most of us to be in relationship in a good way. But if nobody's ever shown us what that looks like, then it can be confusing. I think we're also living in confusing times where our ideas about relationship and patriarchy and systemic violence, and there's, so many things that come together in kind of a confluence that gives men in particular permission to hang on to their privilege by using power and overusing power, or using power over. I like both of those phrases. Overusing power, their personal power, or using power over to control or manipulate, or mostly to hang on to what they believe they are entitled to. I'll use the example, somebody comes home, a fella comes home after work. His mom always had supper on the table for his dad when his dad came home from work. So he comes home from work and supper is not on the table, and she's been out all day doing whatever she's been out doing. And he loses his self-control. And I say that carefully. I'll say more about that in just a second. And and demands, what's going on? Where's my supper? What's happening? Why isn't that on the table? If he is yelling or being coercive, he's hanging on to what he believes is his right. It's his right to have supper on the table. It is his right to be served. This is a privileged position. I want to hang on to that privilege. So I'm going to do that by overpowering or intimidating. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So there's lots of reasons why men use violence. And I think, part of that, it has brought them enormous benefit in one way or another. We very often socialize boys. We worship athletes who are violent. We worship athletes who beat each other up. We worship athletes that get in fights. We worship, this is kind of the systemic part of how we've socialized men and continue to. So here's this confusing time where we're asking, people to put away the violence, and yet we are upholding men who use violence. So violence on the, in the ring, you might say that that's very different. And I would agree that violence in the ring is different from violence in the home. But as long as we celebrate violence in the ring, it's hard not to give yourself permission to be violent in your home. And I use that language very specifically. Violence is always a choice. Violence is always a choice. And it's so important to recognize that what we're part of working with men is recognizing that you chose that. And very often, and anybody out there who's works with men knows that very often the excuse is that I had no choice. I had no choice. I don't know what happened. I had no choice. She was pushing my buttons. She was this and that. I just wanted her to shut up. To which is a very good time to ask the question. So if the police showed up in that moment, what would you do? Well, I'd put her down. I'd back up. I'd, stop choking her or whatever. Oh, so if the police showed up, you would make a different choice. Well, yeah, of course I would. Okay. So because the police weren't there, you chose to use violence or intimidation. If the police had shown up, you would choose something different. In all situations, you have power and you have choice. Your power, very often, is what you choose to do next. That's where you have power. You have power in choosing what you're going to do next. So it's intimate partner violence is a choice. And, it's also a learned behavior. That both of those things, there's not a simple answer to, why men are abusive with their partners. It is complex, and it is a behavior that in the past has got them what they want. So again, We're kind of holding on to power, to privilege, to entitlement, to the things that we believe as individuals that we deserve. Any thoughts or comments, please put them in the chat. I would love to be able to respond to any thoughts or questions that any of this information brings up. I think this is so much better if it's interactive. At least I do better.
There have been some comments. You want me to read some of the comments? There haven't been questions, but there have been some comments.
Okay.
You want me to read those, or can you see them there?
No, I can't.
Okay, I know. Sometimes when you're sharing screen, you can't see.
Yeah.
Yeah, so going back to the two become one thing, someone says so much for the unity candle at many weddings, right?
Yes.
The two become one myth, right?
Yes.
And oftentimes, I remember growing up, people would blow out their own candle too, right?
I know. Isn't that a crazy symbolism?
One person says we lose our identity and ourselves and our freedom when we do everything together. Another person says, I think marriage is a mystery. I think we very much remain individuals and at the same time to become one. An overemphasis on one at the expense of the other can be unhealthy. Maggie did a good job of showing how the idea to becoming one can be overemphasized. Okay, and then a question here. What would your response be when they say they are intoxicated and are not in control of their choices?
I would say they have two problems. One is alcohol and the other is violence. And I would never take intoxication as an excuse for bad behavior, any bad behavior. I would say that that person has a substance abuse problem and a problem expressing himself nonviolently.
Yeah.
All righty. Yeah.
And then I think there's one more question. Is it different to say, if you love me, you would want to know what I think, etc., from your statement?
I think that's a beautiful way of reframing that. And I think that's a much stronger goal. If you love me, you would be interested in what I'm thinking. Yeah, that's lovely.
Yeah. And then one person just wrote, alcohol becomes the permission for the violent behavior.
In their mind, it's certainly not permission to be violent, but in their mind, and very often the excuse and the thing that they hide behind and what gets in the way of being accountable is, I was drunk. Okie dokie. And so, as I said, then they got two problems, not one. And I'll move on to the next slide. Oh, excuse me. That's my faithful companion Shredder, who can't bear the thought of me not doing something and paying attention to him. Anyway, here's a slide that I've brought up, which is actually very, very helpful to the men, is that there are two paths of pain. You have an event, a painful event particularly, and what you're experiencing is hurt, or the sense of loss, or fear. And we can go one of two ways with that. We can take the path of revenge, which also we've very much socialized, and whether none of us can help, in a way, being brought up in a culture of revenge. That's the culture that we live in. But if you follow that path, the path of revenge, what I'm doing is passing on my pain. I've been hurt, so I'm going to hurt you, consciously or unconsciously. that is the path of revenge, is that I am going to pass on my pain. And unfortunately, if that worked, you know, there might be something to be said, but actually there is only, if I pass on my pain, there is only more pain in the world. There is less peace and more pain. So in helping people to recognize that this is the well-worn path, this is their neural pathway, is you hurt me, I'm going to hurt you. We can actually, in fact, reroute that, and after hurt or loss, if you take the path of grief, so you can grieve, you can talk about it, you can acknowledge the hurt, you can deal with the pain. And if you deal with the pain, then the outcome is less pain in the world and less pain in your world. To make it specific to the individual, there's more peace and less pain. So that's universal, and it's very specific to that particular relationship. So helping people understand and recognize when they're on the path of revenge or the path of grieving that painful event. You can always move it over. The moment that you get conscious or aware of revenge thinking, you can stop yourself. You can say at any point along there, you know what, I'm really hurt by this. So I'm going to talk about the hurt. And that's how we deal with the pain. Less pain in their personal relationship, less pain in the world. I think it's a helpful model that to know that you are not stuck just because this is the path that you've taken, you know, all of your life. It is not too late to learn another path. And I tell them also, you know, pathways in our brain are very much like pathways in the forest. The first time you're headed down there, you know, your path of least resistance is the one that you've used the most. If you want to create a new pathway, then very often, you know, it's difficult. You're pulling branches out of the way, and you can see my backyard from here. And we have a lot of deer. And all I have to do is stand at the edge of the ravine. I know exactly, I can see the deer paths. If they wanted to create another path, they're going to stumble, they're going to, you know, have obstacles in their way, they're going to have all kinds of things. But if you stick with it, if the outcome that you're looking for is more peace in your family or your relationship, then you stick with it. And the more you use the path of grief, the less you'll use the path of revenge. And the outcome, I say very often to people, you know, what's the benefit of doing this work? The quality of your life improves. The quality of your life improves, and the quality of the life of the people that you care about also improves. Any thoughts? It's a useful model.
There's just lots of validation that people are really appreciating this visual.
Good, great, thank you. So now I'm going to move on to a kind of a more complicated model, but I think that this is so good, and it's so good for people who want to come alongside and help. And here we go. Is that readable to everybody?
some parts are readable and some parts aren't. You could try making it a little bit larger there, Maggie, with that little plus sign in the bottom right
I
corner.
know exactly where that plus sign is.
Yeah, that's helpful. It's still, some of it's a bit small, but yeah, that's more readable.
Well, I'll read through this. So it starts in the box, in the white box, with conflict and harm. And another whole webinar would be on shame. But for now, we're taking a look at this. So it starts with there's conflict or harm. So one, if we go to the shadow side, we can blame, punish, try and control. And I'm talking about now working with men. If we're working with the perpetrators of violence, if we're working for the individuals who have misused the power in their intimate relationship, if we blame, punish, it's like spanking a kid for hitting. You know what? At the end of the day, it really doesn't make any harm. I mean, any sense. It does make harm, 100%. But if we go to, if our response is to blame or punish or control, what that leads to is fear and obligated accountability. Go say you're sorry. Obligated accountability leads to, disempowerment. And the disempowerment throws them into shame, which leads to more conflict and harm. So take a breath, because this is so valuable for people who are coming alongside to understand. So another shadow side of coming alongside of people that have caused harm is that we ignore or distract. Oh, well, it wasn't that bad, not that big a deal. Oh, it only happened once. And I actually heard these words from an RCMP's mouth when a woman was asking to be escorted back into the house to get her belongings. And the RCMP said, every dog deserves one bite. What an appalling, but there's this systemic, it's systemic violence is what it is. But it's also just that you ignore or distract. It's not that big a deal. He didn't mean it. He was intoxicated, whatever that is. And that leads to a disconnection. Now they are disconnected with, whatever caused harm. And they're disconnected. There's no accountability. And actually no accountability in this circumstance leads back to disempowerment, goes back to shame, and it's a setup for more conflict and harm. The good news is we don't have to keep going around and around in those loops. The alternative is creating a space that's safe enough that we can become aware as somebody who's responding to this, sharing, listening, having compassion. But having compassion does not mean that we're not accountable. I think that, in this world and what is asked of us when we are asked what is required of us, it's to walk humbly, do justly, love mercy, do justly, and walk humbly. So to me, that is the absolute interface between justice and mercy is accountability and compassion. We work at that interface. We want to have compassion, But that is not, we are not ever told that compassion only. There's also accountability. Does that make sense? Yeah. And to err too far, either one way or the other, is to harm happens. Harm happens at both ends of that continuum. If you think of justice and mercy, now there's times we're going to lean a little more into justice. There's times we're going to lean a little bit more into mercy. But generally speaking, you know, here's the zone between accountability and mercy. If we are only holding people accountable in a punitive way, we're misusing our power. If we are only merciful and don't hold accountability, then we are part of the problem. So erring too far on either side creates harm. So we want to find that place where we can hold both compassion and mercy. If we get to that place of awareness and sharing and we go to sympathy, then we're part of the problem. Because that will lead right back into ignoring and distracting, that and the disconnection and no accountability. If we're feeling sympathy, scram, rather than empathy. So empathy, I understand what's happened. I feel sorry for you about it, but you know, I understand. And I will treat you with respect. I don't respect your behavior. I don't respect the behavior, but I respect your humanity. So we separate behavior from personhood. And what we're actually, in a way, if they feel guilty about that, great. I don't want them to feel shame about it, because if they go into shame, then they're not accessible. I cannot input their system if they're in shame. I can input their system if they feel guilty about what they've done. I think the distinction between shame and guilt is hugely important. And I think as people who come alongside, we need to understand that difference. So feeling guilty, it's a vulnerable place. But guilt actually says I have a moral compass. I feel bad about what I did. That's excellent. I think people should feel guilt when they've misused their power. But guilt says I have a moral compass, and I'm going to engage in a process, and I will be willingly accountable because I want things to be different, because I feel bad about what I did, because that's not what I'm wanting. I don't want to coerce and overpower my family. That's not my goal. I resort to that when I'm feeling threatened, but that's not the only way out. So with the willing accountability, now they're moving into support and resources, which can lead to repair and connection, rather than the disconnection of no accountability or the fear that comes with obligated accountability. With the right support and resources, and the right support and resources, the first repair that happens is the repair in their own being. And when I say repair, repair does not mean that the relationship is going to be restored. But there is restoration if a man can say, I did this and I regret what I've done. I recognize the harm that I've caused. And even though we're not going to get back together again, I understand that. And that there is reparation in that relationship, not a restoration of the marriage, but a reparation between two human beings. So somebody becomes then, rather than ostracized, there's a possibility for connection and reintegration. Okay. So I know that that's pretty complex and a lot of information, but I think if you sit with it for a while, and the way that this is set up is that the red arrows are always going to lead back to shame or conflict. So, and that the green arrows are the way out of that. Okay. Anything coming in, Jamie?
Not at this moment, but as someone who loves flowcharts, I'm loving this chart.
Good.
This is very good.
Yeah, good. Well, it helps us also to understand these are the ways that so often we engage that are just plain not helpful. And I look at that obligated, so something happens, and I think of children in your life, and how many times have and I certainly have, not my finest moment, but I've certainly said to my kids, now you go say you're sorry. Well, I'm blaming, inducing fear in my kids. Go say you're sorry. Go say you're sorry right now. And it's like that obligated accountability that, okay, I'm sorry. With no understanding of what's happened, but resentment, they feel disempowered, and they feel shame when a grown-up sticks their finger in their chest and tells them to go. Now, it's well-intended, but the difference between intention and impact is worth understanding. My intention is to grow my child up and help them take responsibility, but that's obligated. Without understanding, it is disempowering. On the other hand, if my child, just using this with one of my kids, for example, there's been conflict or harm. I want to sit down and say, okay, what's going on? Well, they took my this and that and the other thing. Okay, I get it. Yeah, I get that. So you really heard about that. I'm mad about it. Okay, you're mad about it. What else? What's underneath mad? Well, I'm afraid if I don't stand up, then they'll just take everything. Okay, I get that. That's empathy and treating a child with respect. I'm not telling him he's bad. I'm telling him what he did isn't okay. So really separating that out. And for my child, you know what? I want him or her to have a sense that feeling that we get when we've done something that's not okay, it's called guilt. And it's important in our development. So when he feels guilt, I'm going to ask him to have the vulnerability and the courage to go take responsibility. What do you think was happening? Yep.
You can ask a question. Someone asked a question very much about what you're just talking about. So they said, I think people can get stuck in the guilt box sometimes and not know what to do next. What are some tools we can use to move people out of the guilt phase?
Yeah. Well, and to use guilt as being motivating, not bad. And when people talk about the guilt phase, very often what they're talking about is actually shame, because shame keeps us stuck. But guilt, we can actually work with that and say, you know what, sweetheart, that's good that you don't feel good about what you just did. So let's go repair that harm. So repairing that harm, and guilt actually motivates. Shame immobilizes. Guilt makes us actually want to reach out and repair the harm. Shame makes us want to pull away, takes us out of relationship. Guilt actually brings us in relationship. And guilt's taken a kind of a bum rap, if I can say, because we use guilt and shame interchangeably. They are not interchangeable. So learning to recognize the difference, and learning also not to be afraid of, there's nothing wrong with feeling guilty about that. As a matter of fact, I'm proud of you that you have that uncomfortable feeling knowing that you've done something wrong. That's great, sweetheart. That's great. Now that you're willing to take responsibility or accountability, you know, what do you need from me so you can go tell so-and-so that you're sorry about what happened? I don't know, it's a very good. Okay, so we'll just hang out together while I support you to go say you're sorry or to apologize. So, you know, the same framework with, you know, telling kids, pointing our finger at them and saying, go say you're sorry, that, you know, we can't, it's the same thing with working with men. That is just not going to be an effective tool. It is just not. That doesn't mean there's not accountability and they're going to have to face, you know, charges or court or jail or probation or whatever. And maybe it's not to the extent where there's going to be, you know, a legal intervention. But even before things get anywhere near that place, it is good to have a model that says we can do this differently. And I like the example of, because everybody, I think, has at some point said, you need to go say you're sorry, without unpacking what's going on for the individual. So it's the same for, you know, as we demand our kids to go say they're sorry, it's not helpful to demand that men go say they're sorry without all of the other process that's got to happen first.
We have some more questions, Maggie. Is it a good time to ask you a few more questions?
Sure.
So there's a question here. I just gotta go back. Yes, here we go. Is there any way to help a person who cannot and will not admit their use of power and abuse? So someone who's narcissistic.
Would you say that again, Jamie?
Is there any way to help a person who cannot and will not admit their use of power and abuse? And then, yeah, so someone, and then like narcissistic. Yeah.
I'm going to say yes and no. And one is to actually let somebody who is experienced and has a model for intimate partner violence. There's not a way, I don't think, for a layperson to do that work. But I think particularly if they are, you know, narcissistic and refusing to take responsibility. And it's kind of, at the end of the day, this work is a little bit like AA, Alcoholics Anonymous. I think Alcoholics Anonymous does a tremendous job of offering accountability and support and a place to talk and get information and get things to think about. And not everybody who goes to AA is going to get sober. It's helped so many people. But I wouldn't say that AA doesn't work because some people don't get sober. There are some people that are not going to, you're not going to be able to input their system. And that's a good thing to know. I want partners to know that yes, he's come to group and this or that if I'm having partner contact and if they're trying to, keep the marriage together. And sometimes it's just this person is not at a place where they're going to change. So not everybody's going to change. Some systems are harder to input than others. And I expect resistance in the beginning. So for example, somebody, in the beginning of group, it's not uncommon at all to have somebody say, well, I never did this and I never did that and I never did the other thing. And I welcome that. I say, that's great. I'm glad that you've had enough self-control that you've never done that. And now that we've got that over with, let's talk about what you have done. I will listen to what they haven't done. They're defensive. They're, don't feel safe enough to be vulnerable. So, but over time, which is why Beyond Blame was 20 weeks, is because change happens over time. And if at the end of that 20 weeks, they're still making excuses for their behavior, then this is an indication that this person is not yet ready to change. I hope that answers the question.
I think it did, Maggie. Yeah, that's helpful. Did you want me to ask you some more, or do you want to continue? I'm just looking at the time here. We have about 17 minutes left. There are more questions, but you also might have information that you were planning to share.
Well, you know what? Let's go with a few more questions, and I'll just do one other piece.
Okay. Yeah, so someone asked, Maggie, can you speak to bullies who tend to pick on someone weaker than themselves, yet they themselves hold much woundedness within? It takes a lot of energy to be a bully.
And this sounds a rather broad brush, but, show me a bully and I'll show you somebody who's been bullied. Hurt people hurt people. And there's probably, support at home. I want to say this carefully, but there's probably some powerful figure, somebody misusing the power in the life of that bully that has rewarded no matter how subtly. Maybe mom's in tears because she got a phone call from the school. But you know what? There's that secret high five with dad that says, yeah, that's right. Don't let anybody push you around. So I think that, anti-bullying campaigns should be in every single school. And you know what? And, the other thing too is how do we address that in our congregations or with kids on the playground or kids in Sunday school? And how do we address that in a good way? I think of Barbara Coloroso, whose work is, I think, excellent. She wrote a book called The Bully, the Bullied, and the Bystander. And again, if we can create a culture that says, how do we actually unpack things, not only for the one that's been bullied, of course, they need support, but so does the bully. Now, there's sanctions and support. So both of those things, you can't err on the side, go too far in either direction of only sanction or only support. We need to work at the interface of sanction and support. in the same way that we would support a victim of intimate partner violence, we must support the perpetrator, or we'll never break the intergenerational pattern.
Mm-hmm. That's excellent response, Maggie. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have one more question here. How to protect children from emotional mental abuse and narcissistic fathers?
Ooh. You know what? And I think that narcissism is on a continuum.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's the what I would call the lower end of narcissism, I think that there are ways that at the lower end you can actually input the system of a narcissist. If they're at an extreme end, to recognize that we're probably just not going to input that system. And how we protect our kids, that's complex. And I don't think that there's an easy answer, but I think the first thing is kind of recognizing where on the scale of narcissistic behavior is the perpetrator. And then and again, I'll say it's kind of like, again, there's folks that are going to get sober and there are folks that aren't. And how do you protect a child from somebody who's just not willing to quit drinking? Well, you help them to completely understand that this is not their fault. This is not their responsibility. That this is something that's going on for the grown-up and that the grown-up has to deal with. But first and foremost, to really help any child understand that the problems of the adults are not the responsibility of the child.
Yeah, thank you, Maggie, for that. That's a very complex and painful situation.
Yeah.
So
Yes, it is.
there can't be an easy answer for that, but yeah, thank you for those words.
You're welcome.
Yeah, well, maybe there's a question here about where we could find information about some of the programs that were mentioned in the beginning, but maybe what I'll do is I'll let you maybe send me some links and stuff after we can send that out.
Yes, I'll do that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, I'll let you, wrap things up here, Maggie. So we have about 15 minutes, so feel free to share what you have planned to share.
Okay, well, there's a couple of things. I've got one more slide. And, here's the goal of the work. I think it's to really help individuals to not just see, but understand how their behavior was harmful. And in that, I have something called the full apology. In the full apology, so many women have heard again and again and again, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And, the men kind of get into this trap and say, how many times do I have to say I'm sorry? I said, you have to say you're sorry until somebody else understands that you get it. So I tell men all the time, stop saying you're sorry. And it's like, what? Yay. I said, no, it's not about saying sorry, because sorry becomes, over time, shut up. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And when we get to that place, it's like, what I'm really saying is shut up. I'm tired of saying this. How many times do I have to say I'm sorry? What's the matter with you? We're blaming, once again, the victim for not being able to receive this. Well, they've heard it so many times. What a full apology looks like is, here's what I regret about my behavior. Here's what I'm going to do about it. And the third part is there something you need from me right now about this? So, for example, sorry, I yelled. Well, I said I was sorry. Okay, well, now I'm yelling again while I'm apologizing for yelling. Rather than saying you're sorry that you yelled, what we're looking for is, here's what I regret. I regret that I raised my voice. I regret that I scared you and the kids. I regret that caused you harm. Which says I understand what I've done and I understand the impact. Here's what I'm going to do, give them ownership of the problem. Here's what I'm going to do because I know that I have a tendency. So I'm going to see somebody, I'm going to talk to my pastor, I'm going to try and find ways. I'm going to read this book, I'm going to look for a group, I'm going to whatever. Here's what I'm going to do about this problem that I have. And the third piece in a full apology is, what do you need from me right now about this? Well, I need you to follow through on what you said you're going to do. Okay. I get that's what you need. You need me to follow through on this. And maybe it is, whatever, but I warn men that whatever, when you ask that question, you need to be willing to do what is required of you. If she says, I need you to just leave me alone, you need to be able to say, okay, are you, for an hour, if I went for a walk, if I went to buddy, what does that mean? And you need me to leave you alone. Well, just get out of my hair for right now. Would an hour be okay? Or you need me to go spend the night at my parents'? Whatever that is, but find out when, whatever, and sometimes it's, I need you to give me a hug. I need you to tell me you love me. I need you to go play ball with the kids. I need whatever it is, you need to be willing to either do it or say, she says, I want you to drop dead. You're going to say, okay, that seems a little drastic. Not going to do that. Is there something else that we could negotiate that would help you feel safe in this moment? And that's what we're looking for. What will help you feel safe in this moment? Okay. I'll go very quickly to say we really need to understand the difference between impact and intention. So my intention, which I've heard many, many times, I just wanted her to stop screaming, which is why I held her head, put my hand over her mouth. She thought she was going to die because it was over her. She felt suffocated. My intention was to make her stop screaming. Okay, what was the impact? The impact that she was fearful, that she couldn't breathe, that she was assaulted, that, there's a lot of, this was the impact. I don't care what your intention was. We must take responsibility for the impact, and then we might get to share our intention. But so often people just leapfrog over the impact and say, well, that's not what I meant. Well, that's not what I meant. That's not what, without taking responsibility for the impact. That's first. Intention comes second. Okay. So those are the things that I wanted to jam into. We just take so learned behavior, entitlement, justice, and equality. I'll quickly say, for everybody in the room, pastors particularly must have a list of local resources. Find out who's doing the work and who's doing it well. Find out if they have an analysis for violence, or are they going to blame the partner because, you know, she doesn't want to have sex. Well, she doesn't want to have sex because you were fighting all day. You know, that's not an excuse for bad behavior. But sometimes people come alongside and go, oh my gosh, well, she's not fulfilling her conjugal responsibility, or, you know, all kinds of crazy things that people come up with. So know the resources. Do not be afraid of secular resources. Please don't be afraid of secular resources. They, you know, as a pastor, your job is their spiritual well-being. Let somebody else, you wouldn't set a leg. You know, if I broke my leg, I wouldn't go to my pastor to set that bone. And I wouldn't refuse help because they're not a Christian. You know, I'm going to get the best resource available to me in that moment. Everybody should have, every church should have a list of who does work with men, who does the work with children, who've witnessed abuse. Where's a safe place for the woman to go? Even have like a forensic nurse who's available, who does sexual assault. And please, these folks are expert in their field, and we must support the work they do. And you know what? If you don't want to send somebody to a secular resource, then get a Christian resource in your community. But you have to support that. Does that make sense?
Great, Maggie, thank you. And I think Hennis just put a link in the chat there, which is for Winnipeg specifically. It's our domestic violence resource map. So it has really, it is the, it has all things related to this topic, related to resources in Winnipeg, including, I think there's stuff in there for men. But Hennis, I think you had a couple of questions that you wanted to ask Maggie. So I think we have a few minutes for that.
Yeah, thank you, Maggie, so much for your insights, and I wholeheartedly agree with the approach that you take around keeping the balance between accountability and support or that mercy that you mentioned. It's almost like you ride a bike and you cannot pedal on one side only.
Yes,
right? So you gotta
exactly.
keep the bike rolling. I have a question. If you can share maybe one short story, what impact you have seen after men have attended your group, sort of that stands out for you, because I think that's also important for people to know, you know, what kind of impact do we have? And sometimes we feel, well, there's no impact, right? And people don't change, and people sort of try to just go through the motions, but nothing actually changes in their hearts. If you have one short story that you want to share, and then I have two other questions.
Yeah. So let me just say, well, a short story. There was a fellow who came to group and so resistant and so crabby and so cranky, and just blame. And I finally, after it's a longer story, but at the end of the day, he finally went to, he came to the group, and then he came back to the group as a volunteer. He went to the probation group, and then he came back as a volunteer and did a 20-week program and another one, and became an absolute, he wrote letters to the editor about taking responsibility, and there's help for men, and people can change. And it was quite lovely. But my favorite shortest story is a fellow like that who came through, and he lived in community, and I got a phone call a year after this fellow had finished the group, and he said, "Just Maggie?" I said, "Yeah. I want what Arnie got." So thank you.
Okay, yeah, that's great. And I've, you know, in the work that we do, I've often found that that men, you know, especially sometimes when they start out being resistant, they'll often say at the end, you know, what I learned is that I do have a choice. And what you mentioned at the beginning around values and discovering and exploring values that men already bring that have been either pushed aside or they're not they're not conscious of that. I think that's a good start. That's almost a foundation to build something better and move away from abuse. I've always found that helpful. I have a question in terms of if you have some suggestions. So for a man who has gone through a program like yours or other program, in terms of practical steps around repairing harm. So we know that once a man has done program, the work really only begins then, when both partners are willing to give the relationship another try. I'm not talking about the ones who say, you know what, this relationship is over. But do you have some suggestions of what men can and need to do in order to repair the harm that they have caused?
Yeah. And my simple answer to that is they need to demonstrate different behavior. They need to demonstrate, not talk about what happened, but demonstrate that they are making change. And the other is like really in not just a parroting way, be able to repeat what they've learned, but demonstrate change and not make any excuses for their behavior. So even at the end of say, yes, I understand this, this, and this, and I also want you to understand that I was drunk or I was this, or, my dad used to do that or whatever. But complete accountability that says you have the right to be angry. You have a right to want some space right now. I'm going to respect whatever boundaries you put forward. That's it. Okay.
And I have one final question from my side around, you mentioned faith leaders, pastors, people that work in the faith. You said use resources that are in your community. And if you have, some other insights in terms of, I think just foundationally, I think, when we look at biblical stories, and particularly the life of Christ and his modeling of what relationships can and should look like, what pastors can do in their own ways to emphasize that this is an important topic, and around the role that man should play, particularly men of faith and men who follow or who want to follow Christ and his teachings, as it relates to that to that interaction with their partner or even their children, right?
Totally. Yes. So was there a question in there?
I think if you have some more tips or an emphasis around, I think that the church could be the primary example of how we live a different type of or act in relationships compared to maybe what the world and what culture teaches our kids in school, in the media and in movies and all of those things.
You know what? Yes, and I think that it all has to be run through the filter of Christ's behavior, not the selection of particular verses that we use to knock people over the head and subjugate women, but to actually to have it through that filter, and that filter again of justice and mercy, holding them in balance.
Thanks, Maggie. I realize that we have gone a little over time, but I think it was worth it. So thank you, Hennis, for those really excellent, insightful questions. And I think we could talk about this stuff for many, many more hours. And I wish we could, Maggie, because I'm sitting here and just soaking it in. I just really, really value your heart. And I can tell you, we can all just experience your years and years of experience and work and passion, like committed to this. And so thank you for, doing those years of work and then sharing this wisdom with us and what you have learned. And it's just so insightful. So thank you. Really, truly thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And let it be the pebble that's dropped into a still pond. And I pray that there is a ripple effect that creates peace and safety for every family member. So thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me.
And there's much gratitude in the chat for you.
Oh, thank you.
You know that too.
Okay. Alrighty. Is there an official? Well, I can.
Well, you can stop sharing, or just you could just leave if you want.
All righty.
Well, all the best with the rest of your day, Maggie.
Thank you. And shalom, shalom.
Yes. Thank you.